Good evening to you. Thank you. I thought I cleaned my glasses because I thought that looked blurry. And then after I cleaned my glasses, it still looked blurry. It's not blurry on my screen here, and so we'll have to try to investigate and see if we can get a fix for that. But I think I can translate well enough for you as to what we're looking at here in case it's blurry to you. And we can get the gist of it. There's something that happens here that's going to be very prominent in our text tonight in Joshua chapter 2. Of course, the Exodus from Egypt started in a place called Ramses. You see the yellow line, this little squiggly line that's coming out. It started in a place called Ramses. You can read about this in Exodus 12:37 and following. And then it continued on to various points, which we don't have time to talk about tonight. But then, of course, the Egyptians begin to engage in hot pursuit. And now what? We're hemmed in, but God is able, by miraculous power, to part the Red Sea and to make it passable for the children of Israel. And I want to reemphasize to you, we're not talking about a small amount of water needed to be parted here. We're talking about anywhere from 1.2 to 2 million Israelites needing to cross. And what kind of swath of water would you need to, part in order to get that many folks across without them all having to go in single file? And furthermore, I'd like to tell you that all of our brethren would be completely sold on the absolute truth of the miracle that we read about in Exodus. But my father in this very city attended a course, upper graduate level course, taught by brethren, in which it was argued that the Red Sea was not really the Red Sea at all. It's like a marshy swamp, ankle deep. And that, you and I are just really missing the point if we insist on it being big walls of water. And look, if you spell your God with a capital G, do you have any trouble at all believing that God could part waters sufficiently to let that many people cross that rapidly? Do you have any problem believing that if you spell God with a capital G? Why even balk at the idea that God couldn't have done that? At the idea that God did that. He did do it. And why balk at that idea that he did? Now, they crossed the Red Sea at some point. We're never told exactly the location, but we know it was the Red Sea. And as they continue on down into the Sinai Peninsula, of course, there is the need for manna and food and sustenance, and God provides that for them. And then they end up coming to Mount Sinai, where the Ten Commandments are received. And then, of course, after they receive the Ten Commandments, they continue their travels. They murmur about the quail, and God provides more than enough. In fact, they're up to their eyeballs in it by the time God gets done with them. And they continue on their journey, and then they come to the point where it's time to send. The black line represents the spies going into Canaan. And do you remember who one of those 12 spies was? Caleb was, and who else? Joshua. And do you remember what the report was when the spies returned and came to Kadesh? 10 of the 12 said, we can't do this. Do you have any idea how big these guys are? I mean, this is not going to work. There's no way. Now, I want you to file that away. Think about this. Had these people seen anything in recent times that would have indicated that God was well equipped to handle anything they would face? Had they seen anything in recent times to be able to come to that conclusion? Now, the reason I bring that to your attention is there's going to be a character in our study tonight who, decades after the Red Sea crossing took place, was moved to faith by it. And she was not among those who crossed the Red Sea. We're going to talk about her in just a few moments. But do you remember what happened as a result of their disbelief? They have to wander. First, some thought, well, we'll just form our own coalition and go, and they were defeated immediately. And that didn't work, because when you try to do something without God's help, that's never going to get you anywhere. So what did they end up having to do? They ended up wandering in the wilderness for about 38 years. 38 years. And this is a sad moment. But now we're on the cusp of going into the land of Canaan. I want to show you a different map here that will indicate this. I think it's right here, close by. There it is, right there. You see on the, it's not showing up real well on the right-hand side where I'm wiggling this cursor right here. It's, if you read Joshua chapter 2 and verse 1, the text reads, "And Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go view the land, even where? Even Jericho. And they went, and they came into a harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there." Now here's the first thing I'd like to point out. Here they are, in this word, by the way, refers to acacia trees. It's another word for it's the same type of wood, by the way, that God said, I want you to build the Ark of the Covenant out of. I want you to build the furnishings for the tabernacle out of this type of wood. It's an acacia tree. And this was a place that was known for having abundance of those acacia trees. And so that's how it became known as Acacia Grove, or the King James way of saying that is there in your text. Now you'll notice they were to come across from this location and then cross the Jordan and come on over into Jericho to spy it out. And if you're talking 7 miles from here to the Jordan, and then another 7 miles from the Jordan to Jericho. And so here's their task. Now, instead of sending out 12 spies this time, how many did Joshua send out? He sent out 2. Now, let me ask you a question. Is this, as some commentators have suggested, an act of faithlessness on his part to spy out the land? Was that some kind of lack of faith? Not at all. I'd like to invite your attention to Proverbs 20 and verse number 18. Proverbs chapter 20 and verse number 18. This is a principle of wisdom. And what does it tell us in Proverbs 20 and verse 18? Every purpose is established by counsel, and with good advice, what? Make war. Don't enter into warfare without thought, without preparation, without good counsel and advice. And so that is exactly what Joshua is doing. He is finding out exactly what the lay of the land is. He's finding out exactly what needs to be known as they prepare for the battle. God does for man what man can never do for himself, but he tasks man with the responsibility of doing what man can do. And so that is what we're seeing here in Joshua chapter 2. Now these spies are unnamed. We don't know their names, but we do know where they went. They went to Jericho, and the Bible says they came into a harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. Now for some reason, and the commentators can really either help you or hinder you in some of their comments, for some reason some are just absolutely enamored with why they went to a harlot's house. Were they seeking some kind of sexual escapade with these individuals? There's nothing in the text, nothing in the text to indicate there was anything sordid on their part in going there. Now, I know some have denied this, but the text reveals that it's true in this case. I'm not mentioning the possibility of this also being an inn to get Rahab off the hook for being a harlot. She is a harlot. She was a harlot. There's no doubt about it. And some have suggested, well, she was just running an inn. Well, it could have been both. I don't enjoy talking about this any more than you enjoy about hearing about it, but let me ask you, even in our day, are there more reputable hotels you could stay at versus the pay-by-the-hour hotels that one might stay at? And are there places where people can lodge and also have other interests in mind? Yes, that's the sad truth of the matter. And so it's not either or here. It's not that this was either some kind of brothel or it was an inn. It could have been used for both purposes, but there's no indication at all that these men were there for any reason except to get information. And where better to get information in a clandestine sort of way than to go to a place where they wouldn't expect, perhaps, followers of God to go. And they were there to get some information. There were people who traveled. How did they get information back then anyway? They didn't pick up their phones and text each other and get on Facebook and leave posts and send letters or make a call. How did word get from one place to another back then? By word of mouth. And so what are they hoping they can find at this location? Information that would help them. Now they don't want to be discovered, but that's about to be out of their hands. Verse 2, it was told the king of Jericho. Think mayor here. This is really not, the city-states back then were not humongous. Sometimes they're called kings, but really they're more what we would call a mayor of a particular city or town. It's not like the king of a big nation or a region. He's the mayor of Jericho, you might say. And he was told, behold, there came men hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. So the word has already gotten out. We're not told exactly how it was made known, but they've been discovered. And the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring forth the men that are come to thee, which are entered into thine house, for they be come to search out all the country. They're spies. Now, the woman took the two men, and what did she do with them? She hid them. And she said thus, well, there came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of the shutting of the gate, when it was dark, the men went out, and where the men went, I don't know. Pursue after them quickly, and you'll probably catch them, you'll overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, hid them with the stalks of flax, which she'd laid in order upon the roof. Now again, people want to spend a lot of time discussing her deception. Let me tell you something. Rahab is never commended for being a harlot. She's never commended for lying. What she's commended for is her faith that God is real. And you have to give her also some space to learn and grow, don't you? Because it's her background. People can only be as good as they're what? Taught to be. Had she had the background of being raised under the ethical system of the law of Moses and being taught all of its principles and living and governing herself by God's word, she is going to come to a recognition of some things that she needs to do differently in her future. But right now, the focus that we need to have is on why she's doing what she's doing. Why is she willing to help these men escape? What does she get out of it? And let's see this. As we read verse number, she hid them, by the way, under those stalks of flax. Flax were what was used to make linen garments. And so they're flat, and they're usually about 3 feet long, and you could stretch them out in stacks so that there would be no way to necessarily detect someone. Do I need to do something here? Okay, is this going out? Okay. I
don't think you need it.
Yeah. Check one. Oh, can you still hear me? All right. Thank you. So these stalks of flax are laid out in order upon the roof, and those men are hidden under them. Now, the men that were told that these spies had escaped, they go chasing. Verse 7. The men pursued after them the way to Jordan unto the fords. Now what does the word fords mean? It is a word that means a shallow enough place to cross. That's what the word refers to. The Jordan was not always, very, overflowing, but I want you to notice something in Joshua chapter 3 that's mentioned here that's very interesting about this time of the year. In Joshua chapter 3, and look at verse number, let's see here. Joshua chapter 3 and verse number 15. As they that bear the ark were coming to Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, and watch. For Jordan overflows all his banks all the time of harvest. So this was a time of year when the waters would have been more abundant than others. And so here we find them coming to the Jordan, and they're looking to find a shallow enough place to cross. Now what had happened with the city gates as soon as the people had left to pursue after the spies, thinking that they were still out there? Yeah, verse 7 says they shut the gate. As soon as they which pursued after them were gone out, they shut the gate. Now where are the two spies at this point? They're still at Rahab's place. They're still there on the rooftop. And verse 8 says, before they were laid down, which shows again that there was some degree of lodging available in this location without having to be involved in anything sordid. She came up unto them upon the roof. She said to the men, now this is what I really want to zoom in on. I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that your terror is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. For we have heard. How do you know what you know? Well, we've heard. What have you heard? We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. Whoa, stop right there. That was 40 years earlier. Something she had heard about that happened 40 years earlier convinced her of what? Convinced her that God could win this victory for them. Now you think about this. We heard what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, verse 10, that were on the other side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. We heard all about it. And as soon as we heard these things, what did she say? We knew that there was no way you could conquer us. What did she say? As soon as we heard these things that your God had done, notice she's giving the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you. And you were able to destroy those kings by the Lord's power. And as soon as we heard these things, what does she admit? Our hearts did melt, neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you, for the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and in earth beneath. Can you tell me why a pagan woman has more faith after hearing something that God had done 40 years earlier than the spies had who had just seen God do those things, who went into the land to spy it out? Isn't this a sad, sad contrast here?
But her heart was right.
Well, yes, her heart was. Getting right more and more right every moment. Every passage that we read shows that she's getting better and better in her life and her understanding. But she certainly would not be. If you were to put the 10 spies side by side and put Rahab next to them and say, she's a harlot, and here are the 10 spies, which has more faith in the power of God? Which one do you think the people would choose every time? 10 spies. But the 10 spies, what does this show you? that just because one may grow up and be surrounded by the right truth, religiosity, and even the right words does that guarantee that one is going to have proper faith just because they've been around the right source of faith? So these individuals were not convinced that God, in fact, I wanted you to go back to Numbers and just contrast. Go back to Numbers 13 with me, and I want to contrast for us tonight their reaction to what God could do and Rahab's reaction to what God could do. In Numbers 13, you'll notice that there in verse number 17, Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan. And so when they come back in verse 26, they returned after 40 days, according to verse 25. They come to Moses, to Aaron, to all the congregation of the children of Israel, to the wilderness of Paran to Kadesh. That's where we were earlier on the map. We showed you Kadesh. They brought back word to them, to all the congregation, showed them the fruit of the land, and they told him and said, we came to the land whither thou sentest us, and sure enough, you're right about one thing. God's right about it. It flows with milk and honey. This is just one example of the fruit of it. Look at it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities, they're walled. They're very great. We saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and then you got to worry about the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites in the mountains, and the Canaanites are by the sea. We're being just surrounded by all kinds of opposition. And you can see the murmuring beginning. And Caleb trying to calm everyone down in verse 30. Still the people had said to Moses, let us go up at once and possess it. For what? We're well able to overcome it. We can do this. Why did he think they could do it? Because they wouldn't really be the ones doing it. God would do it. The men, though, that went up with him said, no, we're not able to go against the people. They're stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they'd searched to the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we've gone to search it is a land that just eats up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people, everyone we saw in it were giants. Really, seriously, every single person was a giant. And there we saw the giants, the son of Anak, which come of the giants. We're like grasshoppers in their sight. And what does the church, I say church meaning assembly, what does the congregation back then do? Chapter 4. Ignore the book, chapter, and verse divisions in this case because they were put there for our convenience. What's the immediate reaction of the children of Israel to this report? They are crying, weeping all night, and guess who they're after now? Verse 2. Murmuring against Moses and Aaron, the whole congregation said to them, would God we died in the land of Egypt, or would God we died in this wilderness? Why's the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Wouldn't it be better for us to return into Egypt? These people that we're talking about here had seen what? They'd seen the Red Sea party. These people had seen God rain down manna from heaven, quail from heaven. They'd seen him cause water to come gushing out of a rock in sufficient quantity to quench the thirst of over 1 million people. And what's their attitude? We can't do this. Here is Rahab now in Joshua 2. 40 years after these events have happened, at least after the Red Sea crossing had happened. And what is her mentality? She wasn't even there to see it. She's just heard about it. We've heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, Joshua 2:10. We've heard about what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites. And you can read about what they did to Sihon and Og, and destroyed those kings and their mighty armies. As soon as we heard this, Our hearts melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you, for the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and earth beneath. Did she think the giants of the land were bigger than the God she was hearing about? Yes or no? She had more faith in God as a harlot, as a pagan, than men who'd been witnesses to what God had actually done. And that's incredible. I want you to notice, if you will, verse 12. She says to them, now therefore, I pray you. She said, I want you to promise me something. By the Lord, since I've showed you kindness, that you will also show kindness unto my Father's house. And I need a true sign of that. I need to know that you're really going to do that. True token is what she asked for. I need to know what? Verse 13, that you will save alive my father, my mother, my brethren, my sisters, all that they have. I need a promise from you that you'll deliver our lives from death. And what do the men say to her? Our life or yours, if, was there any condition? You don't utter this, our business. You don't talk about it. Just keep it to yourself. And it shall be when the Lord has given us the land. Now what does that show you? These two spies who were sent out, do they think they can get the land, that God can give them the land? Maybe Joshua chose these two spies for what reason? They were men of faith. They already have determined when there's no question in their mind, if we get the land, we'll come back for you. No, they said what? When the Lord has given us the land, we will deal kindly and truly with thee. We're going to keep our word. She let them down by a cord through the window. Her house was, interestingly enough, upon the town wall, and she actually dwelt upon the wall. Now, what's going to happen to those walls of Jericho? Well, how's she going to be protected then if the walls come falling down? Well, do you think that God knows how to protect the people He promises to protect? Yes. Is He able to cause the wall to fall down? Have you ever wondered how a tornado hit one building and didn't even touch the one that was so close to where its path was? Look, God can, if He wants to, engineer the falling of the walls to be very, precise, so that it doesn't threaten the welfare of Rahab and her family. Yes?
And God has a purpose for Rahab.
Oh yeah, that's right. We are headed to that very important conclusion. I'm glad you're headed there too, because this is a marvelous and wonderful faith-building story. So we see that she says, and by the way, the houses were often built between two walls back then, and so God could have engineered for the walls to fall flat in places that didn't threaten the life of Rahab and her family. He's certainly going to keep His word. He's a covenant God. He keeps His promises. Well, what does she tell these spies they need to do? You need to get to the mountain. I want to quickly show you this, if I can get it to show up well enough here on the screen. This is the area of Jericho. And I'm not sure just how much you can tell from... This is flat. This is a plain right here. It's like the Jordan Rift. And this area, right, it's like a rut, a deep rut, so to speak. It's a rift. And so, but not far from here, if you go to the west, now remember, they come from the east. They come across the Jordan into Jericho, but she tells them to go where? In verse 16. Get where? Can you tell, and I think if I turn it this way, you can tell it maybe even a little bit more. Can you tell, and let me do this because I think it will make this point even more. What do you see? There, she says you need to get to the mountain. flee to the mountain, go west, and get to the mountain lest the pursuers meet you. And you hide yourselves there for 3 days. Find yourselves a spot there in the mountains where you can hide and stay there for 3 days. And then what? That the pursuers would have come back home by then, and then afterward you can go your way. The men said to her, we'll be blameless of this sign oath which you made us to swear, but here's the deal. Verse 18, when we come into the land, you need to bind this line of scarlet thread. Now this is interesting. This is a different word than the word for cord in verse 15 of Joshua 2. And I don't know whether it's an interchangeable word, because car and vehicle are different words, but they describe the same thing. But whatever the case, there is a color to this cord, to this thread that is mentioned in verse 18 that's not mentioned in verse 15. It could have been the same one, but what do they emphasize? What do they need to see and tell the soldiers to be looking for to know that this is the safe house? We need to see what? Verse 18, the scarlet cord. Hey, is one color as good as another? What do you say? Is one window as good as another? Watch this. A scarlet thread in the window you let us down by. And you bring your father, your mother, your brethren, all your father's household home unto thee, and whosoever goes out of the doors of the house into the street, well then, they're on their own. Their blood's on their own head, and will be guiltless if anything happens to them because they've left the safe place. But look, if you are in the safe place, we promise you that we'll take care of you. But the condition, verse 20, if you utter this our business, we'll be free from this oath which you've made us to swear. We'll be quit of it or free of it. She said, well, according to your word, so be it. Does she agree to this deal? Yes. Sent them away. They departed. And what does she do? She bound the scarlet cord or line in the window. She didn't wait. She did it right away. She doesn't know when they're coming back exactly. She wants to be what? Ready. They went and came to the mountain. Abode there 3 days until the pursuers were returned. The pursuers sought them throughout all the way, but found them not. So the 2 men returned, descended from the mountain. So they leave the mountain and they come back over the Jordan, and they come back into the area where Joshua and the people were. They come back here. And that's where the chapter is going to end with this statement. They said to Joshua, truly the Lord has delivered into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us. A very different report from what the first spies said, 10 of the first spies said. Now let me hurry to this. What is the significance of this woman Rahab? And we won't be able to exhaust this tonight, but I'll introduce it tonight. The very first chapter of the New Testament, the book of Matthew, chapter 1, the Bible tells us in this passage of Scripture that she was indeed a part of the lineage of Jesus Christ. You'll notice the Bible says there in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 5, Solomon begat Boaz of Rahab, which is another way to refer to her. And Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. Rahab is in the Messianic line. She is in the Messianic line. What does this tell you? Can God take individuals who've had a rough past and transform them into something so useful for His cause and His kingdom? Absolutely. And in fact, you know she's mentioned 2 other places in the Bible. In James chapter 2 and Hebrews chapter 11. What does Hebrews chapter 11 say? And it even acknowledges, oh yes, she was known at one time in her life as a harlot. But verse 31 of Hebrews 11 tells us what? By what? by faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not, when she'd received the spies with peace. And what does James 2 summarize about this? In verse 24, you see how that by works a man is justified and not by faith only. He said that about Abraham. Very top of the scale when it comes to good moral living overall. But then can God save? Verse 25, likewise also was not Rahab the harlot justified how? Her faith, yes, but her faith acted. It did something. She received the messengers and sent them out another way. She was converted to the one true God by hearing about the marvelous things that He'd done and coming to believe in Him. And I have no doubt that she changed her life and left her harlotry and any other thing that was wrong in her life to embrace the one true God and to reject the gods of her people. She is certainly a great, great character study. I wish we had more time.